Let me start, though, for you with just a very obvious question. You do the Phil Steele College Football Preview magazine. You go to print, and now we found out some of the games are likely not going to happen. So what does that mean like for you? How do you reassess?
Well, as long as it's just the non-conference games, I'm okay because the magazine is based on conference records. So all my predictions for the conferences, when you see the teams stacked in order, that's how I think they're going to finish in the conference race. It has nothing to do with the non-conference. The only two pages that might get affected a little bit are the top 50 page, where it is the non-conference is factored into that. But for the most part, for the magazine, if they're playing conference football this year, Matt, I'm happy. And I'd like to see some teams play a full slate.
Yeah, there's a lot of really intriguing non-conference games that may get wiped away now. But let me circle back to where we started there, which is LSU and what they do for an encore. Phil, you lose 20 guys to the NFL. When you break down this 2020 LSU football team, what do you see?
I see a lot of talent. In fact, all 8 units still rank in my top units in front of the magazine. And you know, if this was a regular LSU team compared to regular LSU teams, you wouldn't expect too much of a drop-off. But last year's LSU team was special. Mm-hmm. And we saw that in the playoff, blowing out Oklahoma, then blowing out Clemson. And some of the players that are gone are definitely going to be missed. Now, LSU drops all the way down to number 130 on my experience chart. But Alabama's had to deal with that for years. You know, Alabama loses a ton of talent to the NFL every year. 10, 12 players, like LSU lost 14 or 20, as you mentioned, eventually signed. So I do think that they are going to reload, but I don't see them comparing to last year's undefeated squad. The best units on the team, I think they've got one of the best secondaries in the country. Love Derek Stingley. Love Jacoby Stevens. I think you got NFL caliber guys there. So they're just fine in the secondary. Special teams, I rate number 5 in the country. Van Rosenberg at punter, Cade York at kicker, Stingley at punt returner. They've got plenty of talent on the special teams. Receiving core, might have the best receiving core in the country with Jamar Chase, Terrence Marshall. So there is plenty of talent. As I mentioned, the other units all have what I call VHT replacement. So I'm going to say it's a very good LSU team. I just didn't pick them to repeat as SEC West champs this year.
I'm guessing that means you've got Alabama atop the West. So what would be the differentiator there?
I think that when you look at Alabama, they've got more coming back for starters. Normally, you look at go back and take a look at Alabama. They have not had 12 returning starters since 2014. It's been like 5 years since they've had 12. And the reason is they didn't lose as many guys to the NFL. And part of it was, and probably the main reason I picked Alabama to win the SEC West this year, 3 guys turned down the NFL off that offensive line and all opted to return. And by doing that, I've got Alabama as my number 1 rated offensive line in the country. And defensively, if you go back to their defensive front 7 last year, they had a couple of freshmen starting on the defensive line. They had a couple of freshman linebackers filling in when Dylan Moses and Joshua McMillan were lost right at the start of the year. Well, McMillan and Moses are back, plus those freshmen are now sophomores. That's a pretty dangerous linebacking core. The special teams are solid. My biggest question mark with Alabama would be a question mark like with LSU. Quarterback. They've got a more experienced quarterback in Mac Jones, but will he hold off Bryce Young? I don't know that. But I just think overall Alabama's probably more experienced than they've been the last 4 or 5 years, and that's going to help them out.
What about, and I know you're very big on schedule, Phil, you and I have talked enough to know this. Of course, Bama's got to play Georgia this year, where LSU's rotating cross-divisional is South Carolina. How does, or what does that factor in?
Well, LSU also has to play at Florida.
Right. I wasn't going to mention
that. So, I mean, that sort of neutralizes Alabama getting Georgia at home. And, in fact, Alabama's other game is at Tennessee. Mm-hmm. So I think that when you look at the crossover schedule, that's sort of a wash. I'd almost rather play either. Florida and Georgia, I think, are equal. LSU has to play Florida on the road. Alabama gets Georgia at home. So I think that's an advantage. Now, LSU getting Alabama at home, that's good. But my question, Matt, would be, how many folks are we going to have there in Death Valley for that game?
That's a great question. And by the time you get to November, the answer may be different. Hell, Phil, the answer may be different tomorrow than it is today.
That's right.
I'm willing to be patient and wait and see how it all plays out. Phil Steele's our guest. Of course, philsteele.com, STEELE, philsteele.com, the Phil Steele College Football Preview. Has it hit newsstands yet, Phil, or are we waiting on it still?
Now, it's not going to hit newsstands this year. In fact, in years past, we've had the print 200,000 magazines,
right,
send them out. I'm sitting in the office in March, Matt, wondering if we're going to have a football season.
Yeah.
So I said, no national distribution this year. We're just going to do it through the office at philsteele.com. And we've been selling them through the office.
Awesome.
And then Books A Million and Barnes & Noble approached me, and we signed an exclusive deal with both of them. So we'll be at Barnes & Noble. It will be at Books A Million. But the only other place to get it, you're not going to get it at Walmart or Walgreens or any of those places out there. Just Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, and then the philsteele.com website.
Very good. Look, Paul, pull this up for our TV audience. There's philsteele.com, STEELE, right there, the big box on the homepage. You'll see, just order your hard copy now. Tap there, and it'll bring you right to the link where you can order for $19.95. So there it is right there, philsteele.com.
Yeah. Matt, to answer your question, July 24th, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million. But if you order at that spot you just showed, we got the magazines in today. I've got a magazine in my hot hands right now.
Nice.
So we are shipping them out today. Today and tomorrow we'll be sending out all the orders.
If you want your Phil Steele college football preview right now, you can get it at philsteele.com or July 24th at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million exclusively. Couple more minutes here with Phil Steele. You mentioned Florida. Okay, is this the year Florida finally beats Georgia and wins the East?
Well, you mentioned schedule. They've got the schedule to do so
right.
Because you look at the fact that Georgia has to play Alabama on the road. Florida only has 3 SEC road games. Georgia only has 3 SEC home games. It's one of those years where, Florida gets the advantage of the game being in Jacksonville. But I still don't see Florida getting past Georgia. I love Georgia's defense this year. Got them rated as my number 5 defensive line in the country, number 1 set of linebackers, number 4 DBs. I think they've got perhaps the best defense in the entire country. Offensively, I don't care who wins the job. Jamie Newman, JT Daniels, I think they'll do just fine. They've got talent at running back with White and Cook. And the offensive line lost 3 starters. Might be my biggest concern on the team. But as we know, the receiving corps is more experienced than last year when they basically had no experience coming back. So add it all up, I stuck with Georgia despite the fact Florida has the better schedule.
Phil, before we let you go, the thing that every year I look at in your magazine and when you and I talk, and I'm like, if I'm going to make a preseason bet, it's going to be on this. It's going to be who does Phil have among his sleepers the most improved? I think a couple of years ago you had Notre Dame, and I'll be damned, Phil, if they didn't go undefeated and make it to the playoffs. So who do you have on that list this year? Who are the teams that you were expecting to make that jump this season?
Well, I'm going to throw 3 teams at you, Matt, if that's all right.
All right.
We'll start with the most improved list. And the most improved list, I take a look at teams that had losing records last year and say not only will they be improved, they will get to a bowl game, and they'll have a big jump in record. So the 2 teams I'm going to mention from that list, number 1 is Miami of Florida. Now, Miami was just 6-7 last year after their discouraging bowl loss, 14-0. They got shut out.
That was in Shreveport, man. We were watching.
Yeah, and I had Louisiana Tech, so I was pretty happy with that one. But when you look at Miami this year, here's the advantage. They got poor quarterback play last year. Well, guess what? They solved that. De'Ara King comes in from Houston, and if you watch De'Ara King play, he's a guy that could take over a game. So you add him to that Miami offense, they have an offense now. Defensively, they brought back Gregory Rousseau, who was the guy that had 15.5 sacks last year, and as a redshirt freshman. Now they add to him Quincy Roche, who comes over from Temple, and Quincy was the American Conference Player of the Year with 13.5 sacks last year. Those are your 2 defensive ends, big guys in the middle, very good defense. I think you're going to see a huge jump record-wise for Miami. Okay. And wouldn't surprise me to actually see them in the ACC title game.
Okay.
The other one I'm going to throw at you as far as a most improved team is Northwestern. And last year, Northwestern was coming off playing in the Big Ten title game. Pat Fitzgerald was 15-1 in Big Ten play. They went 3-9. And the reason, they had no offense. Well, this year they got 10 starters back on offense. Quarterback play was poor last year. They bring in Peyton Ramsey from Indiana, who did a very good job at Indiana, gives them an instant upgrade there. Join them with some solid running backs, a much improved offensive line, and defensively, they had a top 20 defense last year. You just wouldn't know that because they were 3-9. Almost everybody's back. 9 starters are back. Patty Fisher's back. Miller's back at the defensive end spot. They are loaded on D. I think you're going to see a huge jump from Northwestern, one of those bounce-back teams. Now, you mentioned the surprise teams. Those are guys that I think can actually make it to a playoff spot despite not being in the top 10. I'm going SEC country here, Matt. I'm going Texas A&M.
Wow, okay.
And last year when I talked to Coach Fisher and going over the team with him, the two things struck out at me. Number one, they played a brutal schedule. And as you know, they played 3 teams that were ranked number 1 when they played them. They played the number 4 and the number 8 team last year. The other thing that struck out, they were a young team. They hardly had any seniors on that team at all. So you had a young team playing a brutal schedule, and A&M struggled at times, and they went 8-5. Well, this year, they jump all the way up to number 10 on my experience chart. 17 returning starters coming back. The schedule gets a lot softer. I rate it the number 66 schedule out there. Are they even going to play a number 1 team? Only if Bama's undefeated at the end of the year when they travel to face them. That's their toughest game of the season. They get LSU at home. I see A&M as having the potential to do what LSU did last year, which is sneak into that playoff spot. So they are my number 1 surprise team, which Notre Dame was 2 years ago. And last year, my number 1 surprise team was Utah. Had they won that doggone Pac-12 title game, they would have been in the playoff last year, but they just didn't get there.
Phil, I tell you, I'm going to cash the tickets right now. Or we'll go place the bets anyway. I'll cash those tickets in. Hopefully we have a season that allows me to cash a ticket in December or January. Phil, you're the best, man. PhilSteele.com. You can get your college football preview magazine right now online at PhilSteele.com or July 24th exclusively at Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. No national distribution this year. Just those 2 exclusives and PhilSteele.com, which you can ship today. PhilSteele.com, STEELE, PhilSteele.com. It's a pleasure, Phil. Looking forward to talking to you Fridays this football season, man.
You know I always enjoy our conversations, Matt, so a lot of fun as always. Good talking football with you.
Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.